Okay, get ready for a wild one. Imagine you're a prisoner. You've served your time, you've been on your best behavior, and you're finally told you're free to go. You walk out, you see your family, and then you get an order to turn right back around and surrender yourself to prison. Sounds like a nightmare, right? Well, this was the chaotic reality for hundreds of people in the Philippines, and it all kicked off a legal battle that hinged on some surprisingly tiny details in a law.
And to really get what was happening, let's put a face to this story. Meet NARCISO GUINTO. His petition to the Supreme Court just lays out how surreal this all was. He was officially released. He had the paperwork to prove it. But then, with no new court order, no new charges, he was just told to come back. As he argued, he wasn't a fugitive on the run. He was a free man. His story is really the human element at the very center of this huge legal puzzle.
So, what on earth was going on here? This bizarre legal back and forth, this revolving door of freedom, it all comes down to a special benefit that prisoners can earn for good behavior. And that benefit is called the Good Conduct Time Allowance, or GCTA for short. The idea is pretty simple, really. If you're a prisoner and you follow the rules, you can earn time off your sentence. It's kind of like a credit system, designed to encourage good behavior and rehabilitation. But a new law in 2013, which was supposed to make this system better, ended up creating an absolute firestorm of controversy.
And this brings us right to the heart of the matter. This is a classic case where a law passed by Congress said one thing, but its instruction manual, the rules written by government agencies to enforce it, said something completely different.
And here it is. This is the exact spot where a single word change caused all the chaos. The law itself excluded persons charged with heinous crimes from getting these benefits. But the government's rules, the so-called IRR, changed that word to persons convicted of heinous crimes. Now that might seem like a small change, but legally it's a universe of difference. Charged means you're still just a suspect. Convicted means a court has found you guilty. That one word swap had massive, massive consequences.
And let's be super clear about the kinds of crimes we're talking about here. The law calls them heinous, crimes that society finds especially awful, grievous, odious, and hateful. We're talking about murder, kidnapping, rape, things like that. So the stakes in this debate were incredibly high for everyone involved. This whole mess boiled down to one crucial legal question. Can a government agency, when they're writing the rules for a law, add a new restriction that the lawmakers themselves never put in there? Can the instruction manual be stricter than the actual law? That was the big question that sent this whole thing all the way to the Supreme Court.
So inmates like NARCISO GUINTO fought back. They argued that these new rules were totally illegal and that the government had overstepped its authority. And so their case began its long journey up the legal ladder, landing right in front of the Supreme Court justices. And their argument was pretty straightforward, and honestly, it makes a lot of sense. They basically said, look, an IRR is just supposed to fill in the little details of a law, not fundamentally change it. When the law talked about excluding people charged with heinous crimes, that was clearly meant for people in jail awaiting trial. It was never ever meant to apply to prisoners who had already been convicted and were serving out their sentences. Simple as that. And this is where the story takes a fascinating turn. The Supreme Court's final decision didn't just come down to old legal books or precedents. Nope, it came down to something we all learned back in grade school: grammar. Specifically, the incredible power of a single comma and the word or.
All right, let's zoom in on the exact words the justices were looking at. The law says the GCTA applies to, and I'm quoting here, any offender qualified for credit for preventative imprisonment or of any convicted prisoner. Now, I want you to pay really close attention to that little comma and that tiny word or. That is where this entire case was decided.
See, the court explained that this structure, you have the first phrase, then a comma, then the word or, then the second phrase, that's not just a suggestion. It's a critical piece of grammar. It splits the sentence and the people it's talking about into two completely separate and distinct groups. So here's the court's brilliant logic broken down. Category 1 covers people who are still awaiting trial. And for that group, yes, the law clearly says if you're charged with a heinous crime, you're excluded. But then you have Category 2, which is introduced by that powerful word or. And that second category refers to any convicted prisoner. And for this group, the law says nothing. There are no exclusions mentioned at all. The restriction from Category 1 simply does not carry over. So, okay, a deep dive into sentence structure and grammar. What does this actually mean in the real world? Well, the consequences of this ruling are absolutely huge, not just for the prisoners, but for how laws are written and enforced from now on.
First and foremost, the court just flat out struck down those parts of the government's rules. The sections that added the convicted of heinous crimes exclusion, gone. They were declared invalid because they directly contradicted the law they were supposed to be based on.
And to explain their reasoning, the court used this really beautiful and elegant legal principle: the spring cannot rise higher than its source. Think about that. It means that an administrative rule, the IRR in this case, can never have more power or create more restrictions than the law it flows from. The law is the source and the rules are just the stream. The stream can't be bigger than the source.
So the final outcome is now crystal clear. That rule preventing people convicted of heinous crimes from earning GCTA, it's null and void. Which means that all convicted prisoners, no matter what their crime was, are eligible to earn time off for good behavior while they are serving their sentence. The exclusion for those charged with heinous crimes is still there, but it only applies to people in jail waiting for their trial to finish.
At the end of the day, the Supreme Court's job isn't to decide what the law should be, but to interpret the law as it was actually written. And they did that, meticulously. But this ruling, born from a comma and the word or, leaves us all with a much bigger, more philosophical question. It forces us to debate the very nature of justice and rehabilitation. Should good behavior be able to shorten the sentence for any crime, no matter how terrible? The court has answered the legal question for now, but that bigger public debate, well, that's far from over.